The sun dipped behind the rows of picture-perfect homes, casting long shadows over the well-kept lawns of Oak Ridge Hills. It was a place that seemed like a utopia, a neighborhood where the grass was always neatly trimmed, and the houses were pristine, except for one small problem. The Homeowners Association, HOA, that all-powerful body that controlled the rules of the community, had begun targeting Evelyn Martin. Evelyn, a retired school teacher in her late 60s, had lived in this home for over 25 years. It was where she raised her children, where she nursed her late husband back to health after his stroke, and where she now peacefully lived out her twilight years. She had always kept to herself, kind, friendly, and unobtrusive. But there was one thing she valued more than anything: the sanctuary of her home, and the HOA seemed determined to rip it from her grasp. It started innocuously enough. A letter arrived one summer afternoon, a simple reminder about the rules. Your front yard needs to be cleaned up. We have noticed some overgrown bushes near your driveway. Evelyn had chuckled at the formality of it. She was hardly a slacker when it came to her yard. She'd always prided herself on its beauty, yet the HOA's demands grew more arbitrary with each passing week. A branch hanging a few inches too low, a cracked tile in her walkway that she hadn't noticed until their letter arrived. The letters grew colder, more demanding. Failure to comply may result in a fine. At first, Evelyn did what she could to fix the problems, assuming the HOA would move on to someone else. But then came the second letter, followed by a third, and finally a home visit. The HOA's board members, a group of sharp-dressed, cold-eyed individuals who seemed to float from house to house, arrived with a set of rules and regulations that had grown more rigid and unreasonable. One of the members, a woman named Carol Wells, arrived one afternoon with a thin smile plastered on her face. "We need to talk about your roof shingles, Mrs. Martin," Carol said, inspecting the house from the curb with an almost clinical gaze. "There's some damage up top. You're going to need to have that repaired immediately." Evelyn frowned, glancing at her roof. No damage. But before she could argue, Carol had already made her way to the front door, clipboard in hand. "It's a matter of compliance, Mrs. Martin," she said. "You need to fix it, or we'll start charging you penalties. And the fines can add up." The words stung, but Evelyn was used to a good fight. She didn't back down easily. "There's nothing wrong with my roof," she countered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll have it checked, but I don't think there's an issue." But Carol's eyes narrowed, and a smile crept to the corners of her lips. "We'll see." The next week, Evelyn received a notice of a $200 fine for an unapproved alteration to her home. Her fence, which she had painted a few shades darker than what the HOA permitted. The alteration had been made years ago, and no one had said a word. But now, they were on her like a storm, relentlessly circling her small sanctuary like vultures waiting for her to slip up. Her heart sank, but something stirred deep inside her, a protective instinct that told her something more was at play. This wasn't about a fence or a roof. There was something darker here, something that had yet to surface. Why her? Why now? Evelyn's suspicion only deepened when the HOA began making strange remarks about the neighbors in the community. Mrs. Larson's dog was too loud. The Martinez family's carport was too cluttered. It felt like every inch of this neighborhood was being examined under a magnifying glass. And soon, Evelyn would realize that her house wasn't just under attack, it was part of something much larger. But she didn't know it yet, not in this moment. All she knew was that every time she saw that HOA seal on her doorstep, a chill ran through her spine. Her life, once calm and peaceful, had become a battlefield, and the enemy was closing in. She had no idea that the person watching from the shadows, the one who could end it all, was far closer than she could ever imagine. As Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at the latest HOA letter, a sharp sense of dread tugged at her. The weight of each word, each demand, felt more like a personal attack. She wondered what she had done to deserve this relentless harassment. But unbeknownst to her, The storm that was about to hit had nothing to do with her fence or her roof. It was about something far greater. Across town, in a nondescript building tucked in the heart of the city, another story was unfolding. Behind a desk cluttered with files, a man sat in complete silence, his fingers dancing across the keyboard of his laptop. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned through pages of classified documents. The man was Alex Grant, the FBI director, the head of one of the most powerful organizations in the country. To the public, he was a towering figure of authority and justice, a face in the news, a name spoken in hushed tones across the country. But here, in the quiet under the dim light of his office, he was a different person, one who blended seamlessly into the background of life. No one knew that the calm, unassuming neighbor in Oak Ridge Hills was the very man who had been silently watching the neighborhood for years. And more specifically, no one knew that he had been quietly observing the HOA. For Alex, the decision to take a position in this seemingly mundane suburban community was not accidental. Beneath the quiet facade of Oak Ridge Hills lay a tangled web of corruption and illegal activity, one that had remained hidden for far too long. The HOA was not just a neighborhood watch, it was the face of a larger criminal network, a group that was using the community's regulations as a front for money laundering, fraud, and even organized crime. His mission: to take it down from the inside. From his discreet surveillance operation, Alex had gathered years of evidence, carefully tracking the HOA's every move. He knew things about the neighborhood that no one could imagine, details about people, their finances, and their activities. He had been here for longer than anyone knew, gathering intel without raising suspicion. He had even become a familiar figure at local events and gatherings, the quiet man who always seemed to be there, but never the one to stand out. No one had a clue that Alex Grant wasn't just another suburban professional. He was the FBI director, and he was watching everyone. In his role, Alex knew the power of silence. He watched as the HOA harassed homeowners, pushing them to their breaking points, all the while turning a blind eye to the crimes happening just beneath the surface. His mother had always taught him that justice was a long road, but sometimes it was the quietest people who had the most power to change the course of events. He was determined to ensure that this wasn't just another community plagued by corrupt systems that went unchecked. As Alex sifted through the latest reports, something caught his eye. A set of documents detailing the HOA's escalating pressure on a particular resident, Evelyn Martin. Her case had raised red flags. The sudden focus on her property, the repeated visits, the mounting fines, it wasn't just the usual bureaucratic nonsense. There was something more, something deeper behind the constant attacks on her. Alex's instincts flared. It wasn't just a matter of neighborhood rules anymore. It was personal. He'd always admired the quiet strength of Evelyn, the way she held her ground, even when it seemed the world was against her. He had watched her for months, his eyes following her movements, noting every detail. He knew she was strong, but he also knew the toll that constant harassment could take on a person. The HOA wasn't just targeting her property, they were testing her resolve, and Alex realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. What the HOA didn't know, what no one in Oak Ridge Hills knew, was that Evelyn was not alone in this fight. Her son, the seemingly ordinary man who lived just a few streets away, was a figure far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. Alex had kept his distance, playing the role of the unassuming neighbor, never letting his true identity slip, until now. But the time had come for the facade to fall. As the clock ticked, Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard, finalizing plans to confront the HOA. It was time to reveal who he really was. No longer would the ruthless tactics of the HOA go unchecked. No longer would they hide behind their fake smiles and threats. The time for secrets was over. Alex Grant, the FBI director, was about to make his move. Outside his office window, the city hummed, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But Alex knew things were about to change. For both his mother and for everyone in Oak Ridge Hills, A reckoning was coming. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the newest letter from the HOA. This one wasn't a polite request, or even a warning. It was an ultimatum. Failure to comply with community standards will result in immediate legal action. The letter read, neatly printed in black ink. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, but her heart pounded. The words weren't just harsh. They were personal. It was as if the HOA wasn't just after her house anymore, but after her very peace of mind. Her eyes flicked to the clock. It had been nearly a week since that last confrontation with Carol Wells, and now the attacks were getting worse. She had gone out of her way to make sure her yard was in perfect shape, to fix the small fence issue, even to hire someone to inspect her roof. Yet they kept coming, the demands more unreasonable, the threats more direct. Evelyn knew something wasn't right. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't just about lawn care and a few broken tiles anymore. This was a war, and she was the target. The wind picked up outside, the trees bending under its force, casting eerie shadows across her front yard. As Evelyn stood and moved toward the window, a chill ran through her. She had the strangest feeling that someone was watching her. It wasn't a new sensation. It had been creeping into her mind ever since those first letters arrived. The feeling that she was being observed, tracked, seemed almost paranoid, but she couldn't shake it. Suddenly, a car pulled up at the curb outside her house. A black sedan, sleek and silent, parked across the street, far enough to blend in with the rest of the vehicles, but close enough for her to notice. The passenger door opened, and out stepped a tall man dressed in a dark suit. His movements were deliberate, calculated. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but there was something unnerving about the way he scanned the surroundings, as if he were searching for something or someone. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Who was he? Why was he here? She leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look without being seen, but the man's gaze flicked upward. Their eyes locked for a moment, and she felt a jolt run through her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. Maybe? Was it a warning? A signal? Her heart raced in her chest as the man turned and walked toward the front door of the house across the street. It felt like time stopped. The air was thick with tension. She held her breath, trying to make sense of what she had just experienced, but it was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Something was very wrong, and Evelyn's gut told her that the game was about to change. The man's presence was no coincidence. He was here for her, for this house, and the HOA's increasingly erratic behavior was all part of the puzzle. The realization hit her like a wave. The HOA wasn't just some organization enforcing rules. They were part of something much larger, something far more sinister. They had targeted her for a reason. Later that evening, as the last of the daylight disappeared behind the horizon, Evelyn received a phone call. It was from Carol Wells. The woman's voice, usually so calm and clipped, now sounded tight, almost threatening. "Mrs. Martin," Carol said, the edge in her voice sharp. "You have 48 hours to fix the issues on your property. If not, we will have no choice but to escalate things. This could get ugly." Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened. She could hear the faintest hint of menace in Carol's tone, something she hadn't noticed before. What had changed? It was almost as if they had no intention of letting her go. Just as she was about to respond, there was a knock at the door. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet house, jolting her out of her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat, and her stomach twisted into a knot. She opened the door slowly, and there, standing in the dim light of her porch, was a tall, imposing man. His expression was unreadable, but there was a calm in his presence that made her skin crawl. It was the man from the sit-in. "Good evening, Mrs. Martin," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Before she could react, the man stepped forward, and the door slammed shut behind him. Evelyn's mind raced. Who was this man? What did he want? Her stomach twisted as a dark thought crossed her mind. The HOA wasn't the enemy anymore. It was something much, much worse. The air in Evelyn's house grew thick with tension as the man stepped over the threshold, his polished shoes making no sound on the hardwood floors. She backed up instinctively, every muscle in her body telling her to run, to hide, but her feet wouldn't move. This wasn't just any stranger. This man was here for a reason, and that reason wasn't good. "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of fear and confusion that swirled inside her. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, the blood rushing through her veins as adrenaline kicked in. The man didn't respond immediately, instead taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating. Every movement felt calculated, purposeful. He wasn't here to waste time. "I think you already know who I am, Mrs. Martin," he said calmly, his voice smooth and controlled. "But for the record, my name is Michael Fox. I work for the FBI, and I've been watching you for quite some time." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. Her mouth went dry, and she could feel the blood drain from her face. The FBI. Why was the FBI involved in this? And why did this man, this stranger, feel so familiar? Something about his demeanor was unsettling, yet strangely authoritative. She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "FBI," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" Fox's eyes softened slightly, but there was no warmth in them, only a cold determination. He took a step closer, and Evelyn instinctively took a step back. The distance between them felt impossibly small now, the air dense with unspoken threats. "I'm here because you're in danger, Evelyn," he said, his voice low, almost comforting. But there was no comfort to be found in his words. His eyes never left hers as he continued. "The HOA is just a front. They're part of something bigger, something that goes far beyond your neighborhood. And you're right in the middle of it." Evelyn blinked, her mind racing to process what he was saying. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance. It was a cover for something criminal. But what kind of crime could they be involved in? What kind of danger was she really in? Fox didn't wait for her to ask. He seemed to anticipate her questions. "I've been monitoring the HOA for months," he continued. "They've been laundering money, manipulating local businesses, even bribing city officials. Their operation is massive, and they're using this neighborhood as a staging ground for something much more dangerous." Evelyn's head spun. The HOA had seemed like such a minor annoyance at first, a group of overzealous neighbors obsessed with conformity. But this was something entirely different. She had been caught in the crossfire of a criminal enterprise. Her mind flashed back to the strange man she had seen earlier, the one who had watched her from across the street. Had he been one of their operatives? Had they been keeping tabs on her for a reason? "And why are you telling me all of this?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking slightly, though she tried to maintain control. "Why not just stop them? If you've been watching them all this time, why come to me now?" Fox's eyes flickered with something like regret, but his expression remained unreadable. "Because they've targeted you, Mrs. Martin," he said, his voice softening, though the weight of his words made them all the more chilling. "They know you're a problem. You've become a threat to their operation. The pressure they've been putting on you, it's not random. They want you out of this house, out of their way. And if you don't comply, they'll escalate. They'll do whatever it takes to push you out. But that's not the worst part. They've been watching you too. And the more you fight back, the more dangerous it becomes for you." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. She had been followed, watched, her every move scrutinized. It wasn't just the HOA now. It was a shadowy, far-reaching conspiracy that had settled its eyes on her. She had been trying to fight back against their petty rules, their minor demands, but now she understood. This was war. "Then what do you want from me?" she demanded, the sharpness in her voice betraying the panic she felt deep down. What am I supposed to do? How do I stop them? Fox's gaze softened slightly, as if he understood the weight of the decision she was being forced to make. He knew she didn't have the luxury of walking away from this. There was no simple way out. You don't have to do anything alone, Evelyn, he said, his voice calm but resolute. I'm here to help, but you need to trust me, and you need to be ready for what's coming. This isn't just about your house anymore. This is about exposing the entire network, and we need you to be part of that. Evelyn stood there, her mind spinning. She had lived her whole life as an ordinary woman, a mother, a teacher, a person who had never imagined being involved in anything this dark. But the truth was undeniable now. The battle wasn't just about her house, her lawn, or her roof. It was about something much bigger, something she had stumbled upon without ever realizing it. And the war was only just beginning. Her hands clenched into fists, her determination finally rising from the depths of her fear. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. Okay, she said, her voice steady. I'm in. What do we do next? Fox gave a small nod, the corners of his lips twitching into the faintest smile. The game had begun. Evelyn's heart raced, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she had just agreed to. She had been thrust into a world of shadows, a world where nothing was what it seemed, and danger lurked just around every corner. But she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The game had already begun, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. Fox's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of approval in his gaze. Good, he said quietly. You're going to need to be strong. This is going to get much worse before it gets better. But together, we can bring them down. Evelyn swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Fox moved toward the table, spreading out a series of photographs and documents. They were all images she recognized. The HOA, the board members, the houses they targeted. But now, they were more than just faces she had seen passing by in the neighborhood. These were the faces of people who had been manipulating her life from the shadows, controlling everything with a hidden hand. And what Evelyn saw in those pictures sent a cold shiver down her spine. These are the key players, Fox said, pointing to a few specific individuals. Carol Wells, of course, she's at the center of everything. But there are others, people you wouldn't expect. Business owners, city officials, all of them involved in the scheme. Evelyn studied the photos closely, her pulse quickening as she recognized names she had seen on the HOA's letters, people who had appeared at meetings and neighborhood events. But there were others, faces she didn't know, individuals who seemed too ordinary to be involved in something so sinister. They'd blended into the background, just like she had. What's their endgame? She asked, her voice tight with suspicion. What are they really after? Fox's eyes darkened. Money, power, control. And it goes deeper than you think. This isn't just about the neighborhood. It's about influence. The HOA has been a front for a larger network. They use it to control businesses, to manipulate local politics. They'd been laundering money through this neighborhood for years. But it's not just financial. They use fear and intimidation to get what they want. And now, they want you out of the way. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had thought the HOA was nothing more than a petty group of busybodies. But now, the truth was clear. They were a well-oiled machine, operating in the shadows, pulling strings and making sure no one crossed them. She had become a target, not because of her lawn or her fence, but because she had dared to question their authority. And they'll do whatever it takes, Fox continued, his voice low and grim. They'll intimidate you, threaten you, manipulate you. They'll stop at nothing to break you. But we're going to turn the tables on them. We're going to expose them for who they really are. The weight of Fox's words hung heavily in the air. Evelyn's thoughts raced. Expose them? How could she possibly bring down an entire criminal network? She was just one woman, One woman against an army of well-connected, powerful people who could make her life a living nightmare. She felt small, insignificant, but then something stirred inside her, a deep, unshakable resolve. "No," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm not afraid. They've been terrorizing this community for far too long. It's time they paid for what they've done." Fox nodded, his gaze shifting to the documents spread out in front of them. "That's the spirit. But we can't just walk in and confront them. We need to be smart. We need evidence, something concrete that ties them to their crimes. And we need to move fast. They're getting nervous. The pressure we've been putting on them is working, but they're starting to fight back." As if on cue, the sound of tires screeching to a halt outside made Evelyn jump. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she rushed to the window, her breath catching in her chest. A black SUV was parked outside her house, identical to the one she had seen earlier. Two men stepped out, their expressions hard, their movements purposeful. They weren't here for a friendly visit. Fox immediately moved to the door, his hand on the handle. "They're here," he murmured. "They've come to see how much you know. Stay inside. Stay quiet. We'll deal with them." Evelyn's mind was racing. Who were they? What did they want? And why was Fox acting so calm? He seemed like he was ready for this, like he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Before she could say another word, Fox opened the door and stepped outside, leaving Evelyn standing frozen in the darkened hallway, her eyes glued to the window. She could see Fox talking to the two men, his posture calm, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. The men seemed to hesitate for a moment before one of them spoke, his voice carrying through the still night air. "We know who you are, Fox," the man said, his tone cold. "You're not going to get away with this. Not this time." Evelyn's breath hitched. It was happening. The moment she had feared, the confrontation she knew was coming, was finally here. The war had officially begun. The tension outside was palpable, the night air thick with unspoken threats. Evelyn's eyes never left the window as Fox stood facing the two men, his stance unwavering. The men were getting closer now, their steps slow and deliberate, but there was no mistaking the underlying urgency. They had come for him, and they had come for her. Evelyn's pulse quickened as the realization hit her. The battle was no longer just about her house, her yard, or her future. It was about survival. She wasn't sure how long Fox could keep them at bay, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end without a fight. Fox's voice was low but confident, carrying through the quiet night air. "You think you can intimidate me," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you can walk into my life and force me into submission. I've seen worse than you." The man in front of him sneered, clearly unimpressed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Fox," he replied, his voice laced with menace. "We know who you are, what you've been doing. Your little game ends tonight." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Game. What did they mean by that? Was Fox playing some kind of double game? Was he even who he claimed to be? She couldn't shake the growing sense that there was still so much she didn't understand. There was something about Fox, something in his eyes, that didn't entirely add up. Was he truly here to help her, or was he a part of something even more dangerous? Before she could sort through her thoughts, one of the men moved forward, his hand twitching toward the pocket of his jacket. No, this wasn't good. Something about their posture had changed, a dangerous shift. They were here for a reason, and it wasn't just to talk. The man pulled something out of his pocket, a gun, and raised it toward Fox. The sight of the weapon sent a shockwave of panic through Evelyn's chest. No, she couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let them harm Fox, not when he was her only chance of survival. With trembling hands, she grabbed the phone on the kitchen counter and dialed the number Fox had given her earlier. She didn't have time to explain the situation. She just needed help. Her fingers shook as she pressed the buttons, her breath ragged with fear. "Please," she whispered as the phone rang. "Please, Pick up." Back outside, Fox stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the two men. "You think I'm afraid of you," he said with cold defiance. "You think a bullet is going to stop me. It's not going to work, not this time." The man holding the gun smirked. "You're more stubborn than I thought. But don't get it twisted, Fox. You've made an enemy of the wrong people. We have ways of making sure this ends. Permanently." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, her breath shallow. How could Fox be so calm? Was he really in control of this situation, or was he simply trying to buy time? Either way, time was running out. Suddenly, the tension in the air shifted. A car screeched to a halt. The sound of tires slamming into the pavement echoed down the street, cutting through the night like a gunshot. Evelyn's eyes shot to the window, her heart leaping into her throat. A sleek black vehicle, identical to the one the men had arrived in, had pulled up just behind them. The door opened, and another man stepped out, this one even taller than the rest, his presence imposing. He walked toward the group with measured steps, his gaze focused entirely on Fox and the two men holding the gun. "Enough!" The newcomer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Take the gun down." The man holding the gun hesitated, his finger still tight on the trigger. But the authority in the newcomer's voice was impossible to ignore. Slowly, he lowered the weapon, his eyes flickering toward the new arrival. The newcomer stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Fox's with an intensity that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Who was he?" "Fox," the man said, his tone like ice. "You've made a mistake. This wasn't your fight to begin with. You're playing a dangerous game, one you don't fully understand." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Was this man working with them? Or was he a new player in the game? Either way, she knew she had to act fast. Her phone call had gone through, but she hadn't heard anything yet. Would help arrive in time. Fox met the newcomer's gaze, his jaw tightening, but his voice remained steady. "I'm not backing down," he said, his voice unwavering. "You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not the one you need to worry about." The newcomer's eyes narrowed, the corners of his lips twitching into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. "We'll see about that." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She had no idea who this man was, or what his connection to Fox was, but it was clear that things were escalating, and fast. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a war that she had been pulled into, whether she liked it or not. And now it was time to fight for her life. Evelyn's pulse surged in her chest as the newcomer's cold, calculating eyes fixed on Fox. The tension in the air felt suffocating, like a storm ready to break. The conversation that had once seemed like an uncomfortable standoff was now a quiet prelude to something much more dangerous. The newcomer's mere presence shifted the atmosphere, and Evelyn could feel the subtle ripple of threat vibrating through the very foundation of her home. Fox was silent for a long moment, his gaze locked with the man who had just arrived. Evelyn could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes, weighing every possible move. But what could he possibly do against someone who seemed to command such authority with a single glance? The newcomer stepped forward, his long coat sweeping behind him, his shoes clicking against the pavement with an eerie precision. There was no rush in his movement. He moved like a man who knew he was in control, and the others around him were mere pawns in his game. "You've crossed a line, Fox," the man said softly, but the menace in his voice was unmistakable. "You're no longer in control of this situation. You've outlived your usefulness." Fox didn't flinch. His stance remained solid, unmoving. Evelyn watched as he held his ground, even as the gunman remained poised, his weapon aimed directly at him. "This isn't just about you," Fox finally said, his voice calm but forceful. "You've been playing this game for years, hiding behind your little empire, but the truth is coming. It's bigger than all of us now. You can't control the narrative anymore." The man's lips curled into a cold smile. "Narratives aren't what keep you alive, Fox. Control is." His eyes flicked to the gunman, And if Fox wants to keep playing hero, then let's see if he can make it to tomorrow. Evelyn's heart nearly stopped. She could see it in their eyes. They weren't just threatening Fox. They were ready to execute him. And her. The realization hit her with the weight of a freight train. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal network. It was about survival. The man in the coat turned his gaze back to Fox, his smile fading. "You're in over your head, but you've always been overconfident, haven't you?" There was a sharp intake of breath from the other men as the newcomer continued, his words cold as ice. "I could end this right now, Fox. You've been a thorn in our side for too long. But I'll give you a chance. A single chance to walk away. Leave the woman. Leave this town. And we can forget any of this ever happened." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Evelyn's gut twisted with the weight of the decision Fox was about to make. What was he going to do? Did he have some secret plan? Did he have any leverage at all? Fox stood still, his jaw set in a hard line. It was clear he was calculating his next words, his next move. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You think you can buy me off with threats and empty promises," Fox said. "I'm not walking away. Not now. Not when it's all coming to light." The man's smile disappeared completely, replaced by a hard, ruthless stare. "Then you've made your choice." The tension broke, but only for a moment. The sound of tires screeching in the distance cut through the stillness like a blade. The faint screeching of metal met her ears, and Evelyn instinctively turned toward the sound. Was help finally arriving? "Get ready," the newcomer barked, his voice suddenly cold as he took another step forward, his eyes locking onto Fox with deadly intent. The man's hand twitched, his fingers brushing against the side of his coat, where something unmistakable, a gun, was hidden. But before Evelyn could fully process what was happening, a loud bang echoed from the driveway. A vehicle, sleek and black, had skidded to a stop, just feet from the newcomers. The doors swung open with such force that it seemed like a scene from a high-stakes thriller. Armed figures flooded out from the car, moving swiftly and with the efficiency of well-trained operatives. They were dressed in black, their faces concealed by masks, their weapons raised. Evelyn's stomach churned, her mind racing with confusion. Who were these people? Were they here to help, or were they just more players in this twisted game? The black-clad figures moved in formation, flanking the newcomer and his men in seconds, surrounding them with an overwhelming precision. The man in the coat froze, his eyes flashing with the unmistakable sign of recognition. He had been caught off guard. The moment had shifted, and he no longer seemed as confident. Fox's expression remained calm, but Evelyn could see the faintest hint of a smile tug at the corner of his lips. "Looks like the cavalry's here," Fox said, his voice steady, almost amused. The newcomer's gaze flickered between the men who had just arrived and Fox, and for the first time, there was a crack in his otherwise stoic demeanor. Something had changed, and Evelyn had the sickening feeling that this wasn't going to be an easy victory. The game had just gotten infinitely more complicated. "Move them," the newcomer ordered, his voice like a cold wind. And just like that, the storm was upon them. The world seemed to slow as the black-clad figures closed in, their weapons steady and their movements precise. Evelyn's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she watched Fox and the newcomer face off in an eerie silence. The air felt like it had thickened, each second stretching into an eternity. Evelyn had no idea who these new people were, but the tension in their eyes made it clear that they weren't here for a friendly conversation. The newcomer's stoic demeanor had cracked, just a fraction, but enough to show he was now fully aware of the shifting balance of power. The black-clad figures, their faces obscured by masks, flanked him with military precision, their eyes scanning every corner of the street. There was no room for mistakes here. "Move them," the newcomer barked, his voice low and dangerous. Fox, ever the strategist, didn't flinch. "Not today," he replied, his voice cool and unwavering. The way he said it, The confidence in his words cut through the rising tension like a blade. The masked figures hesitated, as if waiting for the command to engage. Evelyn could feel the surge of energy in the air, the anticipation of something explosive. This was it. The showdown that had been building for weeks was about to erupt in full force. The first move came from Fox, not a physical strike, but a single sharp word that seemed to ripple through the air. Now, before anyone could react, a massive roar of engines shattered the night. Tires screeched as a convoy of SUVs came careening down the street, headlights blinding in the darkness. The vehicle screeched to a halt, and men in tactical gear spilled out, their rifles raised and ready. The situation had changed in an instant. Fox wasn't alone. FBI. The lead agent shouted, his voice carrying authority as he leveled his weapon at the black-clad figures. "Drop your weapons. Now." Evelyn's eyes widened. The cavalry wasn't just on their way. They were already here, taking the fight to the enemy. The two factions stood at a standoff, each side poised for conflict, the air crackling with the promise of violence. The stakes had never been higher. The newcomer, his expression now unreadable, glanced between Fox and the approaching FBI agents. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly, his voice losing none of its sharp edge. "You think you can outsmart us. You're dead wrong." Fox's lips curled into the slightest smile. "You're out of options," he said simply. "This ends tonight." For a heartbeat, the street stood still, as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Then, chaos erupted. The first gunshot rang out, loud and piercing in the night. It was followed by a cascade of more shots, the sound of gunfire slicing through the air like a jagged blade. It was all happening so fast. Evelyn ducked instinctively, her body pressing against the wall as bullets whizzed past her. She could feel the heat of the shots as they tore through the night, each one echoing in her ears. The FBI agents had moved in, surrounding the black-clad figures in a tactical maneuver. The enemy was outnumbered, but still dangerous, still deadly. Fox was in the thick of it, moving with the agility of someone who had spent his life in this kind of chaos. His every move was calculated, a dance of survival as he evaded incoming fire and returned the same, taking down targets with pinpoint accuracy. But there was no time to breathe, no moment of respite. Evelyn knew she had to move. She couldn't just hide in the shadows. She was part of this now, and it was time to act. She pulled herself up, moving toward the nearest cover as the gunfire intensified. She had to stay out of the line of fire, but her eyes never left the action. She could see Fox. He was there, right in the center, directing the chaos with the calm of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "Evelyn," a voice shouted through the noise. She turned, her heart leaping as she saw one of the FBI agents gesturing urgently for her to move. It was time to go. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the agent, her feet pounding against the pavement as the battle raged around her. The agent grabbed her arm, pulling her into the relative safety of a nearby alley. The sounds of gunfire were muffled now, distant, but the tension in the air was still palpable. "We've got to get you out of here," the agent said, his voice harsh with urgency. "Stay close." Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She stayed glued to the agent's side as they sprinted through the shadows, away from the chaos, away from the bloodshed. But even as they ran, her thoughts were with Fox. What was happening to him? As they rounded a corner, Evelyn risked a glance back. The street was a war zone now, with the FBI taking control, but there was no sign of Fox. The battle was still raging. And then she saw him. Fox, moving through the chaos with unmatched focus, cutting through the enemies like a storm. His eyes locked onto hers for a split second, and in that brief moment, Evelyn saw it, the unwavering resolve. He was going to finish this. The moral of this entire ordeal became clear to her in that fleeting glance. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to face the storm, no matter the cost. As the FBI closed in and the night began to quiet, Evelyn knew that her life would never be the same, and neither would the neighborhood she had fought so hard to protect. But now, the real battle was just beginning.